The moment my phone buzzed with Jake's name, my chest tightened. I hadn't spoken to him in months, not since he walked out of my life with the kind of calm that makes you question everything you thought you knew about love. And now, here he was, reaching out through mutual friends, asking for help. My hands froze over the screen. Part of me wanted to swipe ignore, part of me wanted to answer immediately, like the old Lisa who had given him everything without hesitation. But I knew better now. I had learned, painfully, that diving into someone else's chaos always left my own life in ruins. I remembered the last words he had said before leaving. "You're too predictable, too safe, too nice." They replayed in my mind like a wound that hadn't quite healed. Too nice. The irony burned because I had loved him with everything I had, always bending, always planning, always worrying about what made him happy. I had sacrificed nights of sleep, my own passions, my own freedom, all to fit the mold of the girlfriend he seemed to want. And it still wasn't enough. I had tried for months to become the exciting woman he seemed to chase. I joined yoga classes I hated, took spontaneous weekend trips that left me exhausted, even bought clothes I didn't like, all for him. Every gesture, every effort had been a performance. And in that performance, I had lost myself. And then there was Maya, the other woman, the one he had left me for, chasing some reckless idea of adventure, leaving me behind for her short-lived thrill. I remembered the sting of seeing them together in photos, laughing as if the life we had built meant nothing. And now, months later, he was back in my orbit, asking for me, expecting perhaps that the old Lisa, the one who would always say yes, would rise again. The cafe where we agreed to meet felt impossibly small. My heart raced as I imagined him walking through the door, taller, still charming, still somehow magnetic, yet undeniably different from the man I once knew. And I realized, gripping the table to steady my shaking hands, that I had built a life I loved, a life that didn't demand I perform for anyone else's approval. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside me. This wasn't about closure. It wasn't about reliving the past. This was about boundaries, about knowing the difference between empathy and self-destruction. And yet, the part of me that had loved him, the part that had spent months planning weekends to chase his smile, staying awake to anticipate his moods, wasn't silent. The sunlight streamed through the window, streaks of gold across the cafe floor, and I felt a flicker of anticipation mixed with dread. This encounter would bring confrontation, maybe answers, and possibly the chance to reclaim my own peace. I wanted to be strong. I wanted to be wise. But most of all, I wanted to feel nothing. And I knew that was a luxury I didn't have. The door swung open, and in that instant, my heart thudded, my pulse raced, and I understood. The story wasn't about him or the chaos he'd created, or even my lingering compassion. It was about whether I could protect the life I had finally built for myself. I first met Jake in the kind of way that makes you believe in fate, even if you don't usually. I was sitting at a tiny corner table in that sunlit coffee shop downtown, sketchbook open, coffee steaming beside me, lost in my own little world. He walked in, casual and unassuming, holding a paperback novel in one hand, oblivious to how much space he'd end up taking in my life. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second, and he gave me this half smile, the kind that made your stomach twist, a mixture of curiosity and mischief. He asked if he could sit across from me. It wasn't a question that demanded permission. It was a subtle kind of certainty that made you want to say yes. And I did. I told myself it was just a coffee shop interaction, nothing more. But his voice, calm and easy, had this way of drawing me out, of making me forget the busy world outside. That day, we talked about everything and nothing. Books, music, the mundane details of life that somehow felt profound when shared with him. Jake had this energy, warm, unpredictable, and quietly magnetic. He noticed the little things, the way I hesitated before adding sugar to my coffee, the careful shading in my sketches, the little anecdotes I thought were too trivial to matter. And somehow, he made them matter. I was 23, fresh out of college, trying to navigate freelance work in a city that felt bigger than I was, and suddenly there was someone who saw me. Not just the surface, not just the person I showed the world, but the whole complicated, slightly messy interior. For the first year, everything was effortless. We wandered through art galleries and farmers markets, laughing at the smallest things, stealing glances over coffee cups. He introduced me to obscure films and experimental music, and I introduced him to quiet routines that somehow grounded him. I thought I'd found someone who understood the rhythms of my mind, someone who could keep up with the way I felt, the way I dreamed, the way I loved. But life has a way of shifting imperceptibly. Around the 14th month, I started noticing subtle changes. He became restless when I suggested we stay in. He wanted adventure, spontaneity, a thrill that wasn't compatible with my more measured nature. If I planned a quiet dinner, he'd roll his eyes, joking about friends taking last-minute road trips or impulsive weekend getaways. At first, I laughed with him, tried to embrace the chaos, but inside, a quiet unease settled like a shadow. Then came the first real warning signs. He would light up at stories of other people's exploits, and I began to notice how he spoke differently about friends like Mark, the guy who lived in a loft downtown, who treated every weekend like a potential story. I tried to bridge the gap by changing myself, subtly at first, then more overtly. I joined rock climbing classes even though I hated heights, went on impromptu camping trips, bought clothes that screamed adventurous rather than me. I thought if I could match his version of excitement, maybe he'd stay. For 6 months, I performed. Every action, every suggestion, every smile felt rehearsed, a tightrope act designed to keep him enthralled. And yet the more I tried, the more I saw him pulling away. The first time he said, gently but firmly, "You're too predictable, too safe." I felt a hollow twist inside me. My kindness, my reliability, my consistency, everything I believed was valuable, suddenly seemed like a flaw. It hurt more than betrayal ever could because it wasn't about a lie or a cheat. It was about me, about my essence. I realized that in trying to be someone else, I had lost sight of myself entirely. And that was when I started to see him differently, not as the boy I'd loved, but as someone I'd been bending myself around, someone whose desires didn't align with the life I truly wanted. And yet, even through the hurt, there was attachment, that lingering sense of what if. We shared 2 years, countless memories, small rituals, quiet evenings, silly jokes. How do you simply erase someone who has been a part of your life for so long? How do you stop caring when every fiber of your being had once been devoted to keeping them happy? That's the paradox I wrestled with for months after he left. I tried to reclaim myself, to rediscover the Lisa who loved freely but didn't need validation through someone else. Slowly, I started pursuing passions for me, not for him. Photography became more than an idle hobby. It became a lens through which I could examine the world and my place in it. I reconnected with friends I'd neglected, people who valued me without expecting me to be a performance. And somewhere along that road, I realized the life I had once sacrificed for Jake, the one I had twisted myself to fit into, was mine to reclaim. Every choice I made, every small triumph, was a reminder that I didn't need him to define my worth. I could love deeply and fiercely without losing myself in the process. It started with small things, almost imperceptible at first, like shadows stretching across a familiar room. Mutual friends mentioned that Jake had been asking about me. Innocent questions, they said, just casual curiosity. But there was a tension beneath it, a ripple that unsettled me. My pulse quickened every time my phone buzzed with his name. A message, a like on social media, a comment on a photo I had posted weeks ago. I tried to ignore it. I had built a routine, a life that felt stable and good, and the last thing I needed was him creeping back into the edges of it. And yet curiosity gnawed at me. Was he reaching out because he missed me? Because he regretted leaving? Or because he needed something else entirely? Something he thought only I could provide? The first clear warning came at a dinner with our old friend group. Jake appeared, casually leaning against the doorway, that same easy smile on his face. He greeted everyone warmly, but when his eyes landed on me, I felt an electric jolt, like touching a live wire. He didn't acknowledge the tension, didn't apologize for the past, didn't explain. He just smiled, that infuriatingly familiar smile, and I realized with a sinking heart that he hadn't changed at all. Then came the messages, short, seemingly harmless texts. Hey, how have you been? Coffee sometime? Would love to catch up. Each one felt like a pebble thrown into the still waters of my life. I could feel the ripples spreading, threatening the equilibrium I had fought so hard to achieve. I remembered vividly the last time we had sat across from each other, him telling me I was too predictable, too safe. And now, here he was, trying to charm me back into the orbit I had spent months escaping. My internal alarm bells were deafening. I remembered the months I had spent reshaping myself, auditioning for a role I never wanted to play. Every camping trip, every impromptu adventure, every forced laugh, it had all been for him. And yet, there was a small, irrational part of me that missed it, missed him, missed the version of life I had imagined we could have shared. I tried to talk myself down. He left, I whispered into the dark as I walked home one evening, the streetlights flickering over empty sidewalks. He chose someone else. You don't owe him anything. But the heart is never that obedient. It remembered the laughter, the whispered secrets late at night, the way he noticed the small details, the coffee I liked, the sketchbooks I carried, the way my hand trembled when I was nervous. And then came the story from our mutual friend, Kale. Jake's new life, his new reckless partner, it wasn't sustainable. He was moving cities, leaving chaos in his wake, and apparently he was reaching out to all his exes for help. My stomach dropped. I realized with a sickening clarity that this wasn't about apology or closure. It was about extraction. He was working his way through a list of people he thought might bail him out, people who still cared, people who were predictable enough to give him what he wanted without resistance. The tension built like a storm on the horizon. Every message from him, every casual encounter, every mention by mutual friends felt like a test, a trap. I could feel the old patterns surfacing, the urge to step in, to fix, to smooth over, to sacrifice myself for someone who had already discarded me. But I also felt the fire of self-preservation, the sharp, clear edge of knowing that this time I wouldn't be fooled. It was a strange, dissonant mix of nostalgia and anger, curiosity and dread, fear and empowerment. Every instinct screamed to look, to respond, to engage, but every rational thought reminded me of the months of therapy, reflection, and self-discovery I had invested in reclaiming my own life. I was no longer the girl who would bend for Jake. I was Lisa, fully aware, fully alive, and fully protective of what was mine. And yet, even as I braced myself, I knew the real challenge was still coming. The storm wasn't just in his actions, it was in my own heart, in the way the past clung, in the way love and hurt had intertwined so completely. It was only a matter of time before the full collision arrived, and I would have to decide. Step back and let chaos unfold, or confront it head on and claim my own power. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day that feels ordinary until it suddenly isn't. I was at my favorite little cafe, the one with the sunlight pouring across the wooden floors and the faint scent of roasted beans in the air, sipping my latte and scrolling through emails. My phone buzzed, a message from Jake. "Can we talk? I really need your help." I froze, the steam from my cup fogging my glasses, my heart skipping a beat I didn't want to admit. Help? After everything? After months of absence, after the sharp wound of leaving me for someone else, after the countless nights I had rebuilt myself piece by piece, he wanted my help. I didn't respond immediately. My mind raced and memories came flooding back. The way he used to notice the tiniest details about me, the way his hands felt warm when they brushed against mine, the late-night conversations that stretched into dawn, and the sting of being called too predictable, too safe. I had loved him with everything I had bent myself into a shape I thought he wanted. And yet here he was, casually asking for me to step back into that old role. Within an hour, the texts kept coming, each one carefully phrased, soft, apologetic, almost humble. "I screwed up," he wrote. "I've realized things aren't what I thought they were. Can you help me sort things out?" I could feel the familiar tug in my chest, the part of me that had once been willing to drop everything, that had once measured my worth by his happiness. But this time there was also fire, a sharp clarity I hadn't had before. I wasn't a teenager chasing love blindly. I was a woman who had learned to protect herself, to value her own life, her own peace, her own stability. And then came the phone call. He was on the other end, voice low, tense, almost pleading. "Lisa, please, I didn't mean for things to get this messy. I thought I could handle it, but I can't. I need you." I listened, my fingers curling around the edge of the table until my knuckles whitened. His words were honey-coated traps, familiar rhythms meant to draw me in, to remind me of the girl I had once been. I could hear the chaos in his life just beneath the surface, the instability, the recklessness, the poor decisions, and now the desperation. And he wanted me to step in. I felt my chest tighten, a storm building inside me. Part of me wanted to scream, to hang up, to throw the phone across the room. Part of me wanted to ask questions, to understand, to untangle the mess he had created and somehow make it right again. And that's when I realized this was exactly what he had always done, not just to me, but to every person who had cared for him. He sought stability when chaos caught up with him, support when he had burned bridges, a lifeline from the people he had left behind. And here I was, the one person he thought would always respond, always care, always fix. I took a deep, shuddering breath, the aroma of coffee barely reaching me through the adrenaline pounding in my veins. I could feel my pulse in my throat, my hands trembling slightly as I put the phone down, refusing to answer again. I wasn't falling into his trap. I wasn't giving him access to my life, my energy, my heart, not this time. And yet, even as I walked out into the crisp air, the sunlight sharp on my skin, I couldn't shake the gnawing unease. The inciting incident wasn't just his request, it was the way it forced me to confront old wounds, old attachments, and the stark choice I had to make. Remain the woman I had fought so hard to become, or be pulled back into the turbulence I had survived. For the first time, I felt the weight of what he had done fully pressed down on me. The betrayal, the abandonment, the subtle undermining of who I was, it all crystallized in that single, simple request. And I knew, with a clarity that left me breathless, this moment would define the next chapter of my life. Either I let him disrupt everything I had built, or I drew a line and finally, unflinchingly, stood my ground. I spent the evening after that call pacing my apartment, my mind a storm of memories, regrets, and anger. Every corner I looked at seemed to echo the ghosts of our past, the sketches I had left unfinished on the desk, the photos of us taken during happier times, the books he had once recommended and that now gathered dust on the shelves. My chest ached, a tight, oppressive weight that made every breath feel like a reminder of how deeply he had impacted my life. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the window, the city lights flickering like tiny reminders of the world moving on without him. I wanted to feel nothing, to build a wall around my heart, to protect the new life I had painstakingly constructed. And yet the pull was relentless. Memories of laughter in the rain, whispered secrets on quiet nights, the gentle brush of his hand against mine. They all fought to remind me that I had once loved him with every fiber of my being. I tried to talk myself down. "He left," I whispered to the empty room. "He chose someone else. You don't owe him anything." But my voice shook, betraying the calm I was trying to summon. I remembered how I had bent myself to his desires, reshaping weekends, interests, even the rhythm of my life to fit him. And now he wanted to intrude into the life I had rebuilt, expecting the old Lisa, the one who always said yes, to rise again. My phone buzzed again. Another message from him. "I know I messed up. I don't know who else to turn to. Can we meet?" I stared at it for what felt like an eternity. Part of me ached to respond, to hear his voice, to confront the man who had both captivated and wounded me. Part of me wanted to scream at him, to tell him to disappear forever, to remind him that I had survived him already. I called my best friend Emma, my anchor in moments of chaos. Her voice was steady on the line, grounding me. "Lisa," she said softly, "remember why you built walls in the first place. You fought so hard to get here. Don't let him pull you back into old patterns." Her words were like a lifeline. I thought of all the nights I had cried, all the self-doubt I had endured, all the efforts I had made to reclaim my life. I thought of the photography classes I had started for me, the friends I had reconnected with, the small victories I had celebrated quietly but fiercely. I realized that responding to him, helping him, stepping back into his orbit, it wasn't just risky, it was a betrayal of myself. Still, I couldn't deny the lingering curiosity, the pull of unfinished business, the gnawing question, what did he really want? Was it apology, redemption, or was it simply the comfort of someone predictable, someone who cared enough to clean up the mess he had created? I spent the night writing in my journal, spilling thoughts I hadn't allowed myself to voice aloud. I wrote about anger, betrayal, and the subtle pain of being too predictable, too safe in someone else's eyes. I wrote about my growth, my new passions, and the boundaries I had set. And somewhere between the pages, I realized something crucial. I could feel empathy without sacrificing myself. I could care without capitulating. I could love without losing my identity. By the time dawn crept through the blinds, I felt a fragile sense of control returning. I was shaken, yes, but I wasn't broken. Jake's intrusion into my life had stirred old wounds, but it had also reaffirmed a truth I had fought hard to understand. My worth wasn't defined by how well I served someone else's needs. It was defined by the courage to protect myself, to honor my own life, and to stand firm, even when the past knocked insistently at the door. I knew the coming days would test me. I knew there would be moments of doubt, flashes of longing, and the lingering question of what if. But I also knew one thing with unwavering clarity. I would not step back into the chaos. Not now, not ever. The next week was a minefield. Every interaction with mutual friends, every casual mention of his name, felt like a spark, threatening to ignite a fire I wasn't sure I could contain. Jakey's presence had begun to seep into my world in ways I hadn't anticipated. Messages left at odd hours, cryptic updates about his life, stories from friends about his reckless decisions, each one a subtle tug at the edges of my composure. I was sitting in my apartment one evening, sketchbook open, trying to immerse myself in a new photography project, when my phone buzzed. A group chat message from Kale. "Lisa, just so you know, Jake's having trouble with housing again. He's asking around. Looks like he might reach out." I felt my stomach twist, a mix of irritation and something darker, old patterns, old memories trying to claw their way back. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, a reflexive urge to respond, to check, to intervene. But I remembered Emma's words. Don't let him pull you back into old patterns. That night, I sat at my window, watching the city lights blur into streaks of orange and white as I tried to center myself. I could feel the tension building in my chest, like a coiled spring ready to snap. I replayed every memory with him, the laughter, the late-night talks, the stolen glances, the heartbreak. Each one felt like both a wound and a warning. The escalation wasn't just in him, it was in the world around me. My family subtly weighed in, concerned about the turmoil that his reappearance might stir. "Lisa," my mother said cautiously over the phone, "are you sure you can handle this? Maybe just be careful." Her concern felt protective, yet it underscored how public this drama was becoming, how personal boundaries I had fought to maintain were under siege. Then came the confrontation I hadn't anticipated. He appeared at a mutual friend's gallery opening, casually leaning against the wall, talking animatedly with everyone, and yet I could feel his gaze, sharp and deliberate, locking on me. My pulse quickened, my stomach knotted. He smiled, that familiar half-smile that had once made my heart leap. "Lisa," he said softly, as if we were alone, even though the room was filled with people. "I didn't mean for things to spiral like this. I could really use your help." I took a slow, deliberate breath, feeling the tension coil through my body. "Jake," I said evenly, "you made your choices. I'm not here to fix them. You have to handle your life without dragging me into it." His face flickered, surprise, frustration, a fleeting shadow of hurt, and for a second I could see the old dynamic threatening to reassert itself. He opened his mouth, probably to argue, but I didn't let him. I turned away, my hands trembling slightly, my heart pounding in a mix of fear, anger, and defiance. I could feel his eyes following me, a silent challenge, but I didn't look back. That night, I journaled furiously, pouring every ounce of anxiety, every tremor of unresolved feeling onto the page. I wrote about the frustration of seeing him manipulate situations and people, about the anger at the way he tried to insert himself into my world, and about the cold, clear knowledge that I wouldn't let him. I wrote about my pulse racing, my hands trembling, the way my chest felt tight with both fear and exhilaration, the physical proof that I was still fully alive, still fully capable of setting boundaries. The escalation wasn't only external, it was internal. Every memory, every shared experience, every echo of the past demanded attention, demanded a response. And yet, I resisted. I held firm, telling myself over and over that the chaos he brought was not mine to carry, that my life, my peace, my stability were not negotiable. By the end of the week, I realized the tension had reached a tipping point. It wasn't just him anymore, it was the stakes he represented. The old Lisa would have crumbled, apologized, intervened. The new Lisa, stronger, wiser, wary, was aware of the danger, aware of the pull, and ready. I wasn't just surviving this escalation. I was preparing to confront it, to define it, and to reclaim the space in my life that he thought he could invade so easily. It happened quietly, almost imperceptibly at first. The storm Jake had stirred in my life began to crash down, not with fireworks, but with the slow, insidious drip of doubt and exhaustion. I found myself awake in the middle of the night, heart racing, staring at the ceiling as memories and fears collided in a way I hadn't anticipated. Every boundary I had set felt fragile, like a thin sheet of ice over dark water, ready to crack at the slightest pressure. The texts didn't stop. The calls were persistent. Mutual friends tried to reassure me, but each conversation about him only amplified the unease. "He's really struggling, Lisa. Maybe you could..." I cut them off before the suggestion could finish. I was done being the safety net for someone who had spent years proving he didn't value stability, didn't appreciate care, didn't even recognize the person I had been for him. And yet, there was a part of me that ached, the part of me that remembered laughter shared in quiet corners, warm hands brushing against mine, whispered confessions in the dark. That part whispered, "Maybe he's changed. Maybe he really needs you now." But when I let myself consider it, the fear crept in. The gnawing realization that stepping back into his orbit would erase the months of growth, the careful rebuilding of my life, the sense of self I had fought so hard to reclaim. I remembered the girl who had bent herself into a version of someone she wasn't, how exhausting it had been, how hollow, how utterly unrecognizable she had become, and I shivered at the thought of becoming that girl again. Then came the confrontation I hadn't expected. A message from Jake that wasn't just a request. It was a veiled manipulation, a plea wrapped in guilt and nostalgia. "Lisa, I messed up. I can't do this alone. I thought I could, but I was wrong. You're the only one I can count on." I felt my stomach twist. I could almost hear the cadence of his voice, imagine his eyes fixed on me, full of longing and expectation. And for a fleeting moment, I imagined stepping forward, giving in, rescuing him, as I had once done. But the moment passed, replaced by a tidal wave of anger and clarity. No, not this time, not for him. I remember pacing the apartment, hands clenching the edge of the counter, nails digging into my palms, heart pounding. I thought of every compromise I had ever made for him, every spark of my own life I had sacrificed to fit his whims. I thought of the countless nights crying alone, wondering if my desire to care made me weak, if my predictability made me unworthy. And then the despair hit, the dark, suffocating knowledge that this man, who had once held so much of my heart, could still unsettle me so completely. I felt small, exposed, vulnerable in a way that terrified me. For the first time in months, I questioned whether I was strong enough to withstand him, to keep him out, to protect the life I had rebuilt. I sank onto the floor, back against the wall, trembling. Tears burned behind my eyes, unbidden but unstoppable. I whispered into the silence of my apartment, "I am not the girl I used to be. I am not hers to fix, his to rescue, anyone's to manipulate." But the words felt hollow against the gravity of the storm inside me. Hours passed. The city outside continued its oblivious hum, indifferent to the inner chaos I was grappling with. And slowly, gradually, I realized that this dark moment, this suffocating, terrifying wait, was necessary. It was the moment when the truth became undeniable. I could no longer allow the past, or him, or anyone else's needs, to dictate my life. The despair was heavy, but it was also a precursor to strength. I knew I had to survive it, to endure it, to rise from it, or risk losing everything I had fought so hard to create. By dawn, I was still trembling, still raw, still uncertain, but something had shifted. The fear was no longer paralyzing. The tears no longer threatened to define me. I could feel the faint glimmer of resolve, a fragile but undeniable spark that whispered, "You will not be undone. You will not give him the power to hurt you again." It was a quiet Thursday morning when clarity finally arrived, not with drama, but with a subtle, undeniable shift. I had woken early, restless as always, and wandered into the kitchen, still wrapped in the fog of yesterday's storm. The city was just stirring, the first rays of sunlight slanting through the blinds, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a strange, steady calm. Jake's latest message appeared on my phone. "Lisa, please, I really need you. Can we meet?" I stared at it for a long moment, letting my finger hover over the screen. For months, I would have replied immediately, driven by old habits, by empathy, by a desire to fix him. But now, something inside me was different. I thought back to every conversation, every manipulation, every subtle push that had pulled me off course. I remembered the nights I had cried alone, the weekends I had sacrificed, the parts of myself I had abandoned to fit into the mold he wanted. And then I remembered my victories, the photography classes that reignited a passion I'd forgotten, the friendships I had rebuilt, the quiet triumphs of living life on my terms. The turning point wasn't a moment of confrontation. It was a moment of truth. I realized that I had allowed him to define my past, but I didn't have to let him define my future. I could feel my pulse steady, my hands unclenching, my breath deepening. For the first time, I understood that power didn't come from changing him. It came from owning myself. I called Emma, my anchor through all the chaos. "Emma," I said, voice steady, "I'm not going to meet him. Not for coffee, not for closure, not for anything. I've realized something important." "What's that?" she asked, calm but curious. "That I'm enough," I said, surprising even myself with the certainty in my voice. "Not for him, not for anyone else. I don't need to fix his life or anyone else's. I don't need to prove my worth through someone else's eyes. I am enough, and my life, my happiness, isn't negotiable." She didn't laugh or try to argue. She just said, "That's the Lisa I know." I hung up and felt a surge of relief. I realized that standing firm, refusing to be drawn into his chaos, was not cruelty. It was self-preservation. I could care, yes, but on my terms. I could be empathetic without being manipulated. I could love without being undone. Later that afternoon, I ran into Jake at a mutual friend's gathering. He spotted me immediately, eyes lighting up with expectation, and started walking toward me. I stopped, took a deliberate breath, and held my ground. "Lisa," he said, voice soft, pleading, "I really didn't mean for it to get this bad. Please." "I know," I interrupted, my voice calm but firm. "You made your choices, Jake. I've made mine. I'm not stepping back into your chaos. I've built a life I love, and I won't let you, or anyone else, take that away." He looked at me for a long, uncertain moment. I could see the flicker of surprise, frustration, and even fear in his eyes, but I didn't waver. For the first time, I realized I wasn't afraid of him. I wasn't afraid of what he thought or wanted or needed. I was finally free of that pull, and it was exhilarating. As I walked away, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The turning point wasn't about confrontation or revenge. It was about reclaiming my life. I had faced the storm, stared into the chaos, and emerged not broken, but unshakable. I had learned that my power was not in rescuing others, but in protecting myself, and in that moment, I felt an unshakable sense of freedom, clarity, and strength. The days that followed were a strange mixture of relief and tension. Jake seemed to understand, at least on the surface, that I would no longer be a lifeline for his chaos. But the fallout from his presence rippled through my life in ways I hadn't fully anticipated. Mutual friends were divided, some quietly supportive, others subtly curious, some outright judgmental. One afternoon, Cale stopped by my apartment, concern etched across his face. "Lisa, you're handling this well, right? Because I know it's not easy." I smiled, a small, deliberate curve of the lips. "It's not easy, Cale, but it's necessary. I've learned the hard way that being nice and predictable isn't a flaw. It's who I am, and I refuse to let anyone make me feel otherwise." He nodded, but I could see the hesitation in his eyes. "Just watch out. He might try other angles. People like that, they don't always give up." I took a deep breath, letting it settle through my chest. "I know, but I've changed. I've built boundaries. And this time, I'm not bending." The ripple effect didn't stop there. Mutual friends began sharing more about Jake's recent troubles: financial instability, burned bridges, last-minute moves. He had contacted Alden for temporary housing, David for freelance work, even Owen for financial assistance. Each story was like a confirmation of everything I had feared, that his return wasn't about growth or apology or insight. It was about convenience. I felt a flicker of anger mixed with a strange sense of pity. It was infuriating and almost laughable how someone could spin their mess into a network of people meant to absorb the fallout. And yet, I recognized that this was exactly why I had made the choice to step back. My refusal to help wasn't cruelty, it was self-preservation. That evening, I sat in my apartment, surrounded by the quiet hum of my reclaimed life. My camera rested on the table, sketches scattered around, the city lights glowing softly through the window. I allowed myself a moment to feel the full weight of the decisions I had made, the boundaries I had enforced, the life I had fought to protect. For the first time in months, I felt unshakably anchored. I knew the chaos Jake represented would continue to exist, but it would exist outside of me. I realized that the fallout wasn't just about him. It was about me, about claiming my right to choose who I let into my world and who I refused to let manipulate it. A text from Emma lit up my phone. "Saw you today. You handled it like a queen. Proud of you." I smiled, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with me. I realized that the fallout had a silver lining. It made me stronger, clearer, more certain of who I was and what I would no longer tolerate. By the end of that week, I felt the strange, liberating power of closure without confrontation. I had faced the remnants of my past, acknowledged the pain, and yet refused to be defined by it. I was free to continue building, creating, and living on my own terms. The storm had passed, not because it had dissipated, but because I had risen above it. The city outside hummed with life, oblivious to the small victories unfolding within my apartment. I sat back, letting the quiet envelop me, and realized that the hardest part had not been surviving Jake's return. It had been learning to honor myself enough to refuse it. And in that, I had finally won. The morning sunlight poured through my apartment window, soft and golden, as if the world itself were acknowledging the calm I had finally earned. I sipped my coffee slowly, savoring the warmth, the aroma, the quiet affirmation that this life, my life, was mine to shape, mine to protect. I thought about the months behind me, the heartbreak, the late nights of uncertainty, the moments I had doubted my own strength. Every encounter with Jake, every manipulative message, every ripple of his chaos had tested me, pushed me to the edge of my patience, my resolve, my self-belief. And yet, here I was, whole, unbroken, stronger than I had ever imagined. There was a profound clarity in the lessons I had learned. Kindness, reliability, predictability, qualities that had once been weaponized against me, were not flaws. They were my compass. They guided me through life, through relationships, through moments of doubt and fear, and they had brought me to someone who valued them, someone who didn't see my nature as a problem to be solved, but as a gift to be cherished. Jared, my boyfriend, had been a quiet presence through all of this. He didn't rescue me, didn't attempt to fix what wasn't broken. Instead, he simply showed up, steady and unwavering, a partner in the truest sense of the word. He noticed the small details, the way I liked my coffee, the way my hands trembled when I was anxious, the little victories that mattered to me. He celebrated them, not with sarcasm or impatience, but with understanding and care. I realized that the lesson wasn't about Jake or about anyone who had caused pain. The lesson was about me, about honoring my boundaries, trusting my instincts, and believing in my worth even when others failed to recognize it. Life would always present challenges. People would always test the edges of my patience, but I now had the knowledge, the confidence, and the resilience to stand firm. I picked up my camera and looked out at the city skyline, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for the life I was living. Each photograph I had taken in the past months, every project, every spontaneous adventure I allowed myself was a testament to growth, to self-respect, to reclaiming what I had once given away too easily. And I understood, finally, that freedom wasn't just the absence of chaos. It was the presence of choice, the choice to engage with life fully, without fear of losing myself, without the compulsion to please or rescue others at the expense of my own peace. I had chosen wisely. I had chosen me. As I closed my journal and set it aside, I felt a gentle satisfaction settle in my chest. The storm had passed. The drama, the heartbreak, the manipulation, they existed, yes, but they no longer held power over me. I was free to love, to create, to live authentically, and to embrace the kind of stability and joy that had once seemed out of reach. And in that quiet, golden morning, I made a promise to myself. Never again would I let anyone diminish the value of my nature, my choices, or my life. I would honor my heart, yes, but I would also honor my boundaries, my worth, and my peace. That was the ultimate lesson and the ultimate triumph.